Hey, welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I really hope you enjoy this video. Good morning. So, because of the changes to all our forms, to the RPA, to everything else, I updated the standard reasonable counters, whatever you want to call it, that you may encounter in a transaction, right? As a listing agent, you receive an offer on your property, and you've got to sometimes you've got to negotiate the terms of those offers, and the way you do that is through either a seller counter or seller multiple counter, depending on the circumstances. And what we're going to go through today, and I think we could finish today, but I'm not sure. It's going to depend. What we're going to talk about today is the proper way to counter, what should be countered, what the most common counters are, and even going to show you some verbiage for those counters, okay, so that you could actually see it and we could go through it and discuss it so that you guys are prepared for countering. And because there was some changes that need to be made when the purchase agreement changed, so I wanted to update those for you guys. So anybody have any questions before I share my screen and we really jump in? Okay, well, let's do this. If you do have a question, let's just go ahead and put that in the chat. You can type the question or raise your hand there in the chat, and then I'll get to you as soon as I can. So here we go. Let's share my screen and get going. All right. So really what you guys should be seeing right now, is actually two pages. What we have is the residential purchase agreement, and we have a printout of some counters, right? And so what I've done is I've created kind of this guide for writing counter offers, and it goes by paragraph. So for us to be able to reference back the counters, they have it right here. You have it right here in front of you. You could look at it. It has verbiage in there already. So we're going to run through the contract, and we're going to look at each one of these paragraphs where there's a possibility that you may need a counter and what that verbiage will be for that. Okay. So, sorry, let me get all settled here and ready to go. All right, here we go. So let's start looking at this first off. The first place that we're going to go to, and we talk about this when we write it, is paragraph 1A. Paragraph 1A is the buyer's names, right? Not going to counter that because we don't know what the buyer's names are supposed to be. If they're written wrong, we wouldn't know that as the listing agent. But we do know the property address. And so we have to be, I think sometimes as agents, we get a little bit too quick in our review of the offers that come in, and we don't pay a lot of attention to the address, but it's one of the things that you have to, because obviously it makes a big difference if the address isn't correct on selling the property. So what we want to do is look and make sure the address is correct. If the address is not correct, then there's your first counter offer, and that counter would be over here on paragraph 1B. Buyer is aware the address on the RPA is incorrect. Correct address is the property address. You're going to write it out. Buyer to verify any inconsistencies prior to open of escrow. The reason for making sure that you guys are checking the right address is it could cause all kinds of issues. I've told this story a number of times before where the people went and looked at two properties directly across the street from each other, fell in love with one of them, said, "This is the one we want." Their agent wrote an offer on the other one that they had seen at the same time because he got confused on which was which. Submitted that offer, got that offer accepted. They thought they had bought house A. They ended up buying house B. So it just so happens that that property went into escrow at the exact same time. And when they closed escrow on their house, they had bought the wrong house. So being clear on what the address is for the buyer's agent is important. being clear on what the address is for the listing agent is also important. You got to make sure that the numbers are correct, that everything's right, especially if you have multiple addresses, multiple APN numbers, because we have right here, like the APN number, or if you have an illegal unit or that you've converted a garage or done something in the past that's not permitted, isn't part of the property, and you've added an address, the post office will deliver to it if you just put an address on, right? You do, our address is 244 and a half, right? Because we're a garage in the back. Post office will deliver. Doesn't mean it's a legal address, doesn't mean it's a legal building. So you have to counter that. So that's part of the address also. Buyers are aware the address and the unit address was created for an unpermitted unit is not a legal address. And then if they do give you an APN number here in this section and the APN number is not correct, and you should double check those APNs just the same way as the address to make sure it is the correct APN. And if it's not, buyer is aware the APN number is incorrect. The correct APN is blank. Those are all pretty straightforward, right? That's clarifying the address and clarifying the APN number to make sure that it's correct. Okay. Questions so far? So the thing is that I know like some of this stuff is going to be like a lot of housekeeping things for countering, but it's stuff that I notice that agents don't do on their own. So I want to kind of give you guys the guide to be able to follow it along, so that maybe what'll happen is you'll feel more likely to use some of these counters, because I think we avoid countering things other than just very specific information like price and services. And there's a lot of things that we do miss. Okay. All right. Next up, the next thing that would probably be a counterable item would be the confirmation of agency. And I've told you guys before in the past, when we're talking about writing offers or going through the RPA, mistakes happen here more often than you would imagine they happen. Let's see. Oh, we got a question already about the address. So, good morning. Can you touch on when you have two APN on an offer? You mentioned we must do two separate RPAs. So, the correct way to do it, if there are two APNs, if it's two separate properties that are being sold together, technically you have to do two separate purchases. Okay. Title will sometimes, and escrow will, they'll run them concurrently. So they'll run it like it's one escrow, they'll run it like it's one insurance, but technically you're supposed to do it with two separate contracts. If you're writing an offer on a property and the listing agent is insistent that it has to include both of those, there's not enough space, obviously. And I mean, you could probably put two in here. If you for parcel numbers, you could probably fit two in there. If they don't fit, you'd have to put more space down here. Okay. You have more space in the additional terms section where you could write in here that is also includes additional APN numbers, and if it's more than one or two. But if that's the way they're requesting it, then you're going to have to do it the way the listing agent wants you to do it, even if it's not 100% the most correct way, but it's still an agreement, right? You've calculated those things together. Usually the problems that title and escrow have with it is that if they're not one property, it's not tied together. And for those of you guys that know, you can look at plat maps and you can see if two APNs are tied together, it looks like a little elongated Z on the parcels. If they're not, then they're supposed to really run two different title searches, because there could be different title issues with two different APNs. So just consult with your title rep or with the escrow companies, make sure that they're okay with that, and then you can proceed from there. All right. So the next thing is the confirmation of agency. So we talked about the agency disclosure. We usually talk about that with the purchase agreement. Since we're not doing purchase agreement, really, we're just doing counters. I didn't go into it, but the agency disclosure form, the disclosure regarding agency relationships, it states the way you can be represented, right? As a buyer's agent, as a listing agent, or as an agent representing both buyer and seller. It has them both. It has that all in there. Well, this is where we confirm that agency. So this is where we state this broker is representing the seller, this broker is representing the buyer, or this broker is representing both buyer and seller. That's where we do this. The problem that the majority of the times I see here is not that they're not putting something in, right? So seller's broker is us, right? Because we're the one countering the offer, and we'll just have me, right? It's that you get your offer from a buyer's agent and they don't put this section in, or they don't do it correctly and they put your name as the agent. I don't see a lot of that anymore, but it used to happen a lot. Okay. So if those things are incorrect, we have to correct them. And again, I've seen a number of offers that come in that people have me review, and they have a counter that they've brought me and say, okay, here's the offer, here's the counter I wrote, let me know, changes that we need to make. And there's been a number of times where there's a mistake here in this confirmation paragraph and it's not addressed in the counter offer. Okay. So here's the counter for paragraph 2B. Buyer and seller are aware that Century 21 All-Stars license number 01280965 is the broker, and whatever the agent's name is the agent, right? So if it's me, I'm the listing agent, and Kyle Estrada, license number, my 01457706 is the agent representing the seller exclusively, and blank is the broker and blank is the agent representing the buyer exclusively. Okay. Generally, they have their own license numbers there, so you don't have to do that. But if they don't, I'm sorry, but you got to go the extra step and put their license number in, or there's a form called confirmation of agency. You could send that with your counter instead and say, buyer to sign the confirmation of agency attached to this counter offer and return with the signed counter offer. Okay, so there's two ways to do it. This one is pretty straightforward, and generally they don't forget their own licenses when the buyer's writing it. That's very rare, but they do forget to put the listing broker and the listing agent's license number in there. Okay. Questions about confirmation? Anybody? All right, let's move on. Next up, right into price, because that's the next thing in the purchase agreement. So as you can see here, paragraph 3A, the majority of our counters are going to be paragraph 3 references. Okay, so just so you know, so hopefully what this does is it helps you guys to recognize the paragraphs too, because having conversations with agents all the time, they don't really recognize this as paragraph 3, and a lot of the references and counters and emails and things they start referencing these paragraphs, and that's not correct. So 3 is the paragraph that we're going to be referencing now. So starting with 3A, first thing, if increasing the sales price 2B. Now, I did not put in this, offer, kind of guide, this counter offer guide. I didn't put in their best and final. I don't think anybody needs to know that counter. You guys are all fairly aware of how best and final works. My suggestion for you, though, is if you are going to do best and final, right, is that you put a starting point on it. Okay. Previous conversations with attorneys that I've had in the past, they have said that there were some legal issues that opened with just the best and final. I don't know how those work, but what I would suggest is if my best sales price, my best offer is at $750,000, and I'm trying to get people up to that or past that, then my best and final counter would read something like buyers to present their best and final offer price, minimum price beginning at $750,000, something along those lines. So that way, what I'm doing is I'm telling the person who's at 750, you got the best offer, and I'm telling everybody else that 750 is my best offer. So you either have to match it or surpass it. The idea that the issue with best and final as your only counter to people is that you also may be alienating somebody who is a good offer. The other thing is that, and it's maybe not such a big deal now because I don't think we're in the place where we're getting, flooded with offers on our listings. We're getting, some people are getting still multiple offers on things just because of where inventory stands. But it's not as hard now when you're getting 3 or 4 offers or 2 or 3 offers to negotiate and present everything, as opposed to, maybe 18 months ago or 2 years ago when we were getting, 10 or 15 offers on a house and you had to kind of weed through them and do it. But what happens, I think, is that just by doing best and final, it has 2 things that could be detrimental to you. Best and final to everybody, even the one who's the best offer, it could put them in a position where they feel like they don't want to bid against themselves, and maybe they don't come up, or maybe they just back out because they're like, I made you my best and final when I submitted the offer. So you have to think about the perception of the buyer, right, when that happens. The other thing that it could do for you, which could be a benefit, is if you put best and final with a minimum of 750, if you have people that are nowhere near that and they can't get near that, they will not respond to your counter offer then. And now you've reduced it down to just those that can qualify or are willing to try to qualify or, pursue it at that higher amount. So it does a little bit of the work for you, not having to filter things out and saying, okay, no, we're rejecting or whatever. They could take themselves out of the race. Okay. So price, if I want to change the price, if I'm going to tell them, I'm just going to put sales price to B. If you do want to do the highest and best, then I would suggest, and this is an opinion, and you guys, it's your business, do what you want. I would suggest buyer to submit highest and best offer with a minimum sales price of 750, 800,000, whatever your best offer is. Okay. To give them an idea. Okay. Close of escrow, pretty straightforward. Close of escrow to be blank days or sooner. I always like to put the or sooner, even though contractually it's always or sooner if people agree to close sooner. I just like to add that in. Okay. So close of escrow to be blank days or sooner. Very straightforward. Okay. Expiration of offer. Okay. If you haven't presented their offer before its expiration date, right? Because we all know that offers expire in 3 days by default. And most buyer's agents do not put an extended date on there. They just send them as they are, right? So if I've now received your offer maybe a week ago, and then I don't present it until now, and we're going to negotiate with you because we like your offer, in my counter, I have to put that you're extending the expiration date of the offer to at least the date that we've sent you the counter, if not a couple days later, so it gives us time to negotiate. So what I want the buyer to do is I want the buyer to actively agree with me that offer is still valid before, as part of my counter offer. I know it seems silly, but there's an expiration date on an offer for a reason. And I don't ever want there to be any kind of loophole, any kind of issue. I want to try to make my transactions as clean and as tight and as closable as possible. So that's why I enjoy the idea of countering things like this, which to most agents feel like minutia, even though it's really an important part of what we do as the listing agent, to close loopholes in the listing agreements and the purchase agreements to make sure that we're protecting our clients. Okay. So if you are presenting an offer that has already expired, this paragraph 3C, expiration of offer, should be part of your counter offers. Okay. Stating that the offer is still valid. Okay. Questions so far? Anybody? No? All right, good. Next up, initial deposit. So the initial deposit, I've always advocated for you guys to do $10,000 as an initial deposit because of where prices got to and because of what the small claims limits are. But now small claims limits have risen to $12,500. So again, we talk about strength of offer, and we talk about, for me as listing agent, I want to protect my seller. I would never go below $7,500 as a deposit. and my max is 12.5, unless we're talking about $1 million plus, really high end properties, then you're probably want to go to that 3% route. The only reason I keep it at that 12.5 is because if there is some kind of a dispute, it's handled in small claims court, and it's still a good chunk of money that people are not going to be easily walking away from. Right? I mean, that's ultimately what we're looking at as an initial deposit. What we're looking at for our client is their commitment to remaining in this transaction and living up to the terms that we've agreed to. I don't know a lot of people that could just write off 12,500 and not feel, a certain type of way about, their performance and making sure they're doing things the right way and not acting in a way that would cause them to lose it. But there's nothing wrong with that 3%, value to an initial deposit when you get to higher end properties, because those people obviously have more skin in the game anyway. But for us and our average sales prices that we're working in the majority of the time, this is a considerable deposit, and it is a considerable good show of faith from the buyer to the seller. So the counter would look something like this. Initial deposit to be anywhere between that 7,500 and 12,500. Deposit to be sent directly to escrow via electronic funds transfer within 3 business days of acceptance. That section where I put via electronic funds transfer and within 3 business days, that's only if they've changed something here. If they did something different, because the default is within 3 business days by wire transfer, right? That's what the contract already says. But if they put something here different, like they put, cashier's check, and they put, 4 business days, or whatever the fact that they changed it, that's the only time I need to do it. Now, if you guys want to make your time period shorter than 3 days, okay, that's fine. You can do that. It's your business. You choose to do it. Just make sure that time is enough time for them to actually make the wire. Like, be reasonable. Because I think sometimes what happens with agents is they have these counters kind of done as templates. And you guys all know how I feel about templates in zip forms anyway with the CAR documents. And so they'll do things like, 24 hours or 48 hours, right? Not business days. They don't rent any of that stuff. They just say 24 hours or 48 hours. And then they accept an offer on a Friday. And so now the buyer doesn't have the ability to live up to the terms of the contract, right? And get their deposit in. So, I mean, be aware of what your actual timelines are when you're making these counters. I think a lot of counter offers that I see from outside offices that come in feel very punitive, right? It's like we're gonna stick it to the buyer. These things that I'm giving to you, like the suggested counters I'm making, are not about sticking it to the buyer. They're about making sure that our transaction is solid. So that it is a bit of a pet peeve for me when I see these counter offers that are solely just to make things difficult on the buyer. Like, there's no reason that their deposit has to be in 24 hours. I see that counter so much. Deposit has to be in escrow in 24 hours. Why? What does it matter if the deposit's in 24 hours if they've got 17 days to do their inspection? What does it matter if their deposit's in 24 hours? The thing is that most listing agents are too lazy to keep people on time anyway, and they don't use the proper forms to do it. So shortening time periods just make it tougher on you as listing agents to stay on top of things. Let's see what we got here. If there is a gift letter involved, do we need to counter and stipulate third-party authorization document must be signed? No, because escrow is going to do that anyway for those things. So you don't need to put that in the counter. When we're talking about the funds, I mean, you could do things like, we'll get to the funds in a minute and we'll talk about it. But I mean, obviously when there's gift funds in there, there's a whole other, dynamic that can be an issue. We'll talk about it a little bit. Okay. So that's the initial deposit. First loan. Okay. This is your loan amount, paragraph 3E1. The amount is there. That's fine. I mean, if their math is off, you could try to fix it for them, but I'm not going to do that. I'd call the agent and say, hey, you guys need to fix your offer. I can't even present it because your math is off. Okay. But what we do want to look at is this fixed or adjustable rate. This has to have something in there. We've talked about this a number of times in class. You cannot leave that blank. It cannot be too low, and it cannot be best prevailing rate. That is a binding item in the contract. This is a legal document. So that is a binding item. That is something that the buyer has to perform to. So if I get an offer from a buyer and there's either nothing in there or an interest rate that I feel is too low or something like best prevailing rate, I'm going to counter. I'm going to say buyer agrees to accept a maximum fixed interest rate of, and I'm going to state the interest rate. So I'm going to counter that because I'm going to protect my seller. I don't want there to be, again, a loophole. I'm trying to close a loophole because we've talked about this. If the interest rate ultimately exceeds the number we agreed upon there, even if they've removed their loan contingency, they could cancel and keep their deposit because they can't perform to what we agreed to. So we've got to take that into account. So remember, whatever the rate is, 0.25%, 0.5% max increase in that maximum interest rate to cover. Or you could go to, I don't want to dictate their terms. Okay, buyer disclosed maximum interest rate and any loan fees being paid with this signed counteroffer. You could do that, right? You could say, hey, so now what's going to happen is they're going to have to counter you with what their maximum interest rate is. And if it doesn't make sense, then we could go back and do the other one. I just like this. So what I would do is I would go with, hey, I'm going to just say, rates are now whatever they're at. I'm going to just bump it up a little bit more because I don't know what your qualifications are. I'm not a lender. I'm going to say, okay, you got to accept 6.5%, 7% or whatever it is. Okay. That's their maximum. They don't have to go that high. All it says is that they can't use that as an out. So if they find out from, that their interest rate is going to go up to 7 and they can't afford that rate, then as long as they do it before their loan contingency is up, they have the right to back out. One thing I didn't include in these counters is having them get cross-qualified with your lender, which is always a good idea to do. And you could add that counter in. And maybe what I'll do is after this class, I'll add it in to the counters. But if you're going to do that, if you're going to say that the buyer must cross-qualify with the seller's preferred lender, don't just leave it there. Put an amount of time on it. Okay. Something like, buyer must cross-qualify with seller's preferred lender and buyer must cross-qualify with seller's preferred lender within 5 days of acceptance, 7 days of acceptance, 3 days of acceptance, right? We're going to add a time period to that. The reason I want to add the time period is because now I can use a notice to perform. Because if day 3 comes and they haven't gotten qualified with the lender, I've now put a time on it. I can send them a notice to perform. If they don't do it, then I can cancel. If I leave it open-ended, like you just have to cross-qualify with my lender and I don't give you an amount of time to do it, there's no way for me to force you. You could wait as long as you want. Yeah, I'm still going to do it. I'm just going to do my inspections and everything else first. Okay? So put a time limit on it. 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, whatever you feel comfortable with. Do that in your counters. And you know what? Maybe I will add this to our little list here. Do we add the current rate? Whatever is you think is a rate that is going to be obtainable for those buyers. And yeah, it's probably going to be a little higher than what they would have written, but that's the problem with you not doing your job as buyer's agent. See, this is another thing is I get buyer's agents that come to me and they get these counters and like, oh man, these counters aren't fair. And I read through the counter and I see a copy of the offer and I see where we made some mistakes or didn't do something exactly right. And now the counter is addressing that. And so unfortunately, as a buyer's agent, when you're not the listing agent, you're in a little bit less control, obviously, of a transaction. And when we're showing our buyers and they fall in love with things and we're not writing the offers the right, 100% the right way or negotiating properly, and we get these counter offers back that we feel some pressure on, we start to complain that the listing agent is being mean, and some are, right? But that's just the terms of being a listing agent. You're in control of the transaction. Take control. Make sure this transaction is going to work the way it's supposed to work for you and for your client. Yeah, you could talk to your loan officer, right? So do we ask the interest rate question to the buyer or the loan officer? No. Talk to your loan officer and say, hey, listen, I got this buyer. They wrote an offer. I'm going to send a counter offer. What's the normal rate going right now? Like what's the get it and then add the 0.25%, half a point to it, and then send back that counter. Okay. All right. Let's go to 3G1. This is credits. Closing cost credit. If you're not going to pay a closing cost credit at all, and they've asked for one here, right? Then you're going to put seller will not provide a credit for buyer's closing costs. If you're going to change the amount, straightforward, seller will provide buyer a closing cost credit in the amount of blank, whatever it is. It's very straightforward, very straightforward. This paragraph right here, 3G2, I put a little note here. This paragraph should be for listing any additional terms to the type of financing, such as buyers qualifying for a down payment assistance program or on an all cash with hard money as an option. Buyer may obtain hard money or private money financing. That's the only thing that should be in there. There shouldn't be anything about credits or the buy downs or anything like that. That gets addressed in a different section. So there's really nothing to counter there. I just want you guys to recognize what should be there. Let me see. So you prefer we get them cross-qualified once the offer is accepted officially, or part of the offer submission cross-qualification must be completed? The issue is that this is my thing about getting the offer accepted and then doing the cross-qual. If I have my lender do all these cross-quals before I even accept an offer, it's a lot of work. I would rather the cross-qual be one cross-qual for the one offer that I accept. If I get 3 offers and all of them say you have to cross qualify before we accept your offer, now I have to have my lender for 0 do 3 cross qualifications. And then I send them back and say, okay, well, this guy doesn't qualify, that guy doesn't qualify. Now we're going to send it back to this one. If I accept one offer, because here's the thing. You guys get FICOs, you get their proof of funds, you get their pre-qual letters and cross-qual or DU, whatever letters. You have an idea of which ones are the question that need to be cross-qualified most of the time. But I would cross-qualify everybody, but do it after acceptance, because now I've done it after acceptance. It's one thing I have to ask my lender to do that. It's great that your lenders will do that for you guys, but they don't get paid for that. And if you're a listing agent and they don't end up getting the buyers from it, then they don't even have that benefit of hey, I do this service to get a buyer once in a while. So, be conscious of their time. They don't just work for you, you know? So I just prefer doing it after I've already gotten an offer accepted. Paragraph 3G2, we are not supposed to specify seller credit buyer but towards buyers or no. That's why there's a paragraph 3G1 that says seller credit, if any, to buyer. There's a paragraph specifically for that. So please do not write that in additional financing terms. Okay. 3G3, seller agrees to pay the obligation of buyer to compensate buyer's broker under a separate agreement, SCAR, SPBB. So here's the newest thing that we're all dealing with as listing agents, and probably the most conversations I've had about countering is this paragraph. So here it goes. Seller agrees, right, to pay the obligation of buyer's broker under a separate agreement. If this is requested and your seller does not agree to pay the obligation of the buyer, then the counter should read as this. This is the first counter that if your seller is not paying anything, seller will not pay any obligation that the buyer may have to compensate buyer's broker. That shall solely be the responsibility of the buyer. That's if your seller refuses to pay any compensation at all. No concessions for compensation to the buyer's broker. That's going to be your counter. If the buyer is requesting an amount and your seller wants to change the amount, Seller agrees to pay blank percent as compensation to buyer's broker. Updated SPBB is attached. Please sign and return with this counteroffer. You have to do that part. You have to. It's required. Okay? So those are your two main counters for a seller requesting compensation. Okay? Questions. And you have to do the SPBB. You have to. You're required. Okay? Any questions? Jesus, go ahead.
Hi, Kyle.
Hello.
Okay, more than a question, I believe it's a comment. So let's say we're charging 2.5% to our buyer on the BRBC, and I already talked to the agent, and they're offering 2%.
Right.
I can just send them the SPBB for 2%, correct? And my buyer will pay the difference, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. Anybody else? Okay. Let's move on. The next thing we're going to do is 3L 1 and 2, which is the loan and appraisal contingencies. I didn't write up the assignment request or the final verification of condition because this is more about common things that you're going to be countering. Okay. Let's see. As a buyer's agent, what's the minimum that needs to be paid for the commission? I mean, for us as a company and for you guys as professionals and the amount of money you're going to earn for the amount of liability you take on, I don't believe that you guys should be doing it for less than 1.5. You should probably be trying to negotiate for 2 as a minimum, but we haven't really set a minimum as a company, so that becomes more of a business approach for you guys. But I would suggest that just for your own ability to defend yourself based on the liability you take on as a buyer's agent, there should be no way that you're less than 1.5 for your compensation. But that's a business decision for you. Okay. All right. Let's go down to now the loan contingency. If you're going to change the time periods on the loan contingency, you're going to write loan contingency to be removed within blank days after acceptance. You're just going to write what you're changing it to. So if you're changing it from 17 to say 14 or 12, then that's what you're going to write. Okay. For the appraisal contingency, same thing. Appraisal contingency to be removed within 10 days, 12 days, 14 days, whatever you're changing it to, after acceptance, and a completed copy of the appraisal to be provided to the seller at that time. I add that in because the contract itself states that the buyer is only required to deliver the appraisal to the listing agent or to the seller if the property doesn't appraise and you're requesting a change in price, right? You're requesting lowering the price of the appraised value. Otherwise, there is nothing in the contract that states buyer has to give a copy of the appraisal. And that sometimes becomes a contentious thing, right? Listing agents will ask the buyer, hey, can you give me a copy of the appraisal? And the buyer's like, no, I don't want to. Or the seller's like, or the buyer's agent is, no, we're not going to give it to you. And now it's a problem, right? Now, I don't particularly see an issue. If a listing agent was to ask me for the appraisal, I'd be like, fine, here's the appraisal, right? I know why most of you as buyer's agents don't want to, is because if it appraises for a higher value, you ultimately believe that that's going to cause issues between you and the seller, especially when it comes to maybe asking for some credits for repairs or asking them to do repairs. You feel like they're not going to be open to the idea of the repair just because they think you're walking into equity. I know that's exactly what buyer's agents think. I can't tell you for sure if that's going to happen, but it makes sense that a seller may be like, I'm less likely to pay for extra stuff if you're already inheriting equity as you move in. But for me as listing agent, I want it. I'm gonna put it in my counter. And now what'll happen is if it's part of the counter and the buyer agrees to it, they don't have a choice to fight me when I ask them for the copy of the appraisal. So if I were you guys, I would start putting this into all of my counter offers as a listing agent, that you're going to provide me a completed copy of the appraisal when you remove your appraisal contingency. Okay. That's it. So that also becomes a notice to perform now, because I said at the same time that you remove your contingency, I'm asking you for that. So if you only remove your contingency but don't send me the appraisal, I can send you a notice to perform to give me 2 days to send me the appraisal. And if you don't, I could cancel on you. Yes, Jesus.
Shouldn't we counter regardless they remove the loan contingencies or not, just for us make sure we have the appraisal? How about if it cancels?
Well, yeah, of course. No,
Decide to cancel, but at least I
Yeah,
get
no,
to have my appraisal. Because
Of course you should. But the majority of people are shortening the appraisal contingency anyway. Let's be honest. I don't know many listing agents that are leaving appraisal contingency for 17 days. So, yes, but if you're not going to change the time period, then yes, you should be buyer to provide a completed copy of the appraisal to seller. That's it. Yes, 100%. Yes, you should be asking for it. Because I'm going to eliminate that shouldn't they provide it to me, because the contract does say any report prepared for the buyer by a third party has to be turned over to the seller. So you could make an argument that, well, that's what an appraisal is too. It's a report done by a third party to benefit for the buyer. So I should get a copy of it. But I'm going to clarify that. I'm going to put it in all the time. Copy of the appraisal to be provided to the seller. That's it. Removing the contingency. Now, if you're going to ask somebody to remove their contingencies with the acceptance and they didn't write it that way, then you're going to write in there, buyer agrees, the appraisal contingency is removed with the acceptance of offer, form CR attached to be signed and returned with this counteroffer. I'm going to include the CR in there. Do the same thing with loan contingency. It's the same verbiage, right? Appraisal and loan contingency are removed with acceptance of this offer. Form CR is attached. Just make sure you fill out that contingency removal form and check those two things off. Changing the appraisal value. So this is one of those things, right, where appraisal contingency is based on an appraised value of. We talked about this in the past, which is what I'm saying there in this section is, if I'm getting these ridiculous, crazy, over asking price offers, which I don't think are really happening right now. This was more of an issue in the past. But if I have my house listed for $700,000 and I'm getting offers at $775,000, and $700,000 is really the true price, I priced it properly, but I'm getting these crazy offers, and that's, again, not generally a product of today, but it was in the past where people trying to get their foot in the door by making these really high offers, getting their offer accepted, and then the property appraises and it comes in where it was listed at, and now they want to renegotiate the price, and now I have an issue with my buyers or my sellers. So what I would suggest that you guys do is you're going to say that the appraisal contingency is based on an appraised value of whatever my list price was. So I was priced at 700. You're the guys that went over crazy 750, 775, right? 800,000 that was happening in the past. I'm going to say, as long as it appraises for my 700, you cannot use your appraisal contingency to cancel. If it goes below my price that I set on it, then yes, fine. I'll let you use your appraisal contingency to walk away. But your appraisal contingency won't work if it appraises for at least what I listed it for. Okay? Does that make sense to you guys, that counter? So what I'm saying is these crazy over ask prices, that offers that may come in, I'm going to tell them, yeah, you still have an appraisal contingency because I know that you have to get your property appraised to get your loan, but it's only going to work if it doesn't appraise for what I thought the property was worth, what my seller and I agreed on what the property was worth. Okay. So that's just a couple options for you as far as the appraisal goes. Questions? Nope. All right. Let's move on. Investigation of property. Again, this is just if you're going to change that 17 days on paragraph 3L3. Are you going to change that? Are you going to change the time periods for insurance? It's all of these things that are 3L3 through 7, right? So everything that's right here for their investigations, everything that you're going to look at in this little square under appraisal, right? Are you changing those time periods? If you are, then you change it for all of those things. It's the same, right? Buyer to have 17 days to do all investigations, or you can list them out. Now, for example, insurance, I wouldn't shorten that. We all know the issues with the insurance. Don't give them as much time as they need for that insurance. I mean, give them the 17 days. There's no need to shorten it. It's going to be harder on them. Again, we want to close. Leave it at the 17 days. I don't have a problem with any of these things being 17 days if we have a 30-day escrow plus. When people start writing offers that are 21-day escrows or countering back saying it's going to be a 21-day escrow, then yeah, I'm going to shorten these periods, especially if they send me an offer saying it's 21 days. If it's a 30-day escrow, I don't have an issue with any of these things being 17. But if you want to reduce them to a time that makes sense. Like I said, with the loan, 17 days is not a problem. Maybe with the appraisal, you want to do it sooner. So if there's an appraisal issue, you're done. You could get an appraisal done in 12 days, 10 on the outside, maybe 10. The investigation, you could shorten it because for them to do an inspection shouldn't be an issue, right? It shouldn't be an issue for them to do it in 10 days. But stuff like insurance, the review of the seller's documents, I can't shorten that without shortening the amount of time that the seller has to deliver them. So again, be respectful of the idea that that review of seller documents has to coincide with the seller actually delivering the documents. The prelim, as long as I order it early, I could shorten that prelim time. The disclosures or the common instance disclosures, I can't really shorten that because we don't know how long it's going to take to get back because escrow is the one that's going to order those from the HOA and make those disclosures. So again, be reasonable with the stuff that you shorten. Don't just say you only have 7 days to do all this stuff because all of these things are dependent on third parties. And that changes when or if the buyer has the time to review them. So be reasonable. That's all I'm trying to say is don't just be hard to be hard. Give them a reason why you're shortening the time periods. And some of these things are normal. Appraisals can be done sooner. Your home inspection can be done sooner. Your informational access to the property should just match. And there's a counter here. Buyer to have blank days for informational access to property because informational access means even if I've removed all my contingencies, the buyer still has access to the property for whatever they want to. I can't say no in that period of time. So I would look at the items that need to have access to the property, like the appraisal and the home inspection, and whatever is the longest, make those match, right? So if my appraisal is 12 days and my investigation of property is 10, then guess what? My informational access, I'm going to counter that to match my appraisal, which is 12, so that they have enough time. Okay? Questions about those? In 3L8, I would disclose to them what items are leased or liened. Instead of like in my counter, I'm going to tell them that, hey, these are the things that you're going to be responsible for from the very beginning in the counter, not later in the offer, which is it's something that most people are doing now is a lot of agents are doing is they're waiting until they get their offer accepted. And then they're saying like, oh, here in our disclosures is the leased or liened items. You've got to qualify for those. And again, that's why I said with these time periods, it's got to make sense because they now you have to get the documents from the people who have the lease or the lien, find out if it is transferable, all of those things. So might as well have done all that work ahead of time and then just make sure that you're countering and telling the buyers what is a lease or lien and what they're going to be responsible for accepting as they move forward. Okay. 3L9, sale of buyer's property is not a contingency unless checked here. So let's just say that you get an offer and they checked that box, but they didn't send you the COP. I know it's happened. It's happened to a lot of agents. I've seen it in person. So if they did, then we're going to put, if they didn't provide the COP, CAR form COP to be incorporated into this agreement, form provided to be signed and returned with the signed counteroffer. That's all I'm going to do is now I'm going to make a COP that makes sense to me. I'm going to send it to them. I don't know their terms, so I'm just going to send it by the default terms and say, here's everything, and you're going to sign this. Again, as a buyer's agent, when I make a mistake, and not including a form that needs to be included or checking a box that needs to be checked, when my counter comes back and they ask for something else and they make the terms beneficial to them, it's my fault. Okay, so just again, make sure that those things are done. And what you're going to do is, as a listing agent, you're going to make those terms of their contingency beneficial to you. Now, you may not know all the terms of it, but you're going to fill it out like how it makes sense for you and your seller. Now, they might counter you back in a buyer's counter and send you a new COP, and that's fine, but at least make them responsible or accountable for the documents that they were missing. Also, their buyer gets to see like, hey, you didn't incorporate a form that was supposed to be incorporated. Again, all I'm saying is that it's you taking control of the transaction. This is the place, though, because there is nothing in the purchase agreement about the property being contingent on the seller finding a replacement property. This should be your cue to make the counter of the sale being contingent on the seller finding a replacement property, right? So this sale is contingent on seller purchasing a replacement property and escrow's closing concurrently. CAR form SPRP to be incorporated into this agreement. Form provided to be signed and returned with this counter offer. Okay. So those are your counters for that. Again, I like to use paragraphs to prompt so that the paragraphs and the counter are making sense because it's flowing in the same direction. I see just a lot of counters where it's like price here and this service there and then something else later on. I like to just try to keep an order. Again, that's just me being, I don't know, a stickler, I guess. But I just feel like it's easier for an agent to understand it or a buyer to understand it when they see it, and it just follows the terms of the purchase agreement. Okay, moving on. 3M1 and 2. This is the time of possession and the seller occupied or vacant units. This is what we're going to counter. Again, if we have a seller that is in possession, and they don't address it here and we need some time, we're going to counter it. If this is a contingent sale, we're going to counter it because obviously my seller needs time. So here we go. Occupancy for seller occupied properties. Occupancy to be delivered at 6 p.m. 3 days after close of escrow at zero cost to seller. Seller agrees to pay a blank amount per diem for any holdover beginning day 4 after close of escrow. CAR form SIP to be incorporated into this agreement. Form provided to be signed and returned with this counter. So the reason that I have the per diem in there is because it's more of a protection of per diem for if I don't move out. If my seller doesn't move out after 3 days, that per diem is more of a protection for them than it is the buyer, because then the buyer can only claim damages in the amount of that per diem. If we didn't have a per diem and my seller breached the contract by remaining in the property for 5, 6, or 7 days instead of the 3 that we agreed upon, then if the buyer could prove any damages, the seller could be responsible for those damages, any costs they incurred because the seller didn't move out when they were supposed to. So if I put $100 per diem beginning on day 4 after close of escrow and we stay for 3 extra days, I know that the limit of the damages my seller is going to have to pay is $300. Okay, so you have to look at it as this is how I'm protecting you and explain it that way to the seller. And what it does is it makes it easier to sell to the buyer's agent and to the buyer, because now they understand that if something were to happen and the seller had to remain for an extra couple of days, at least they know they're going to get paid something. Okay, now if it's a contingent sale, it's going to be a little bit different. Occupancy to be delivered at 6 p.m. 10 days after close of escrow at zero cost to seller. 10 days, because we know with contingent sales that it's a little bit hard. There's more time that it takes, right? Because that sale could be contingent. All kinds of stuff. Occupancy, seller agrees to pay, again, blank per diem, $100, $150, $75 for any holdover beginning day 11 after close of escrow. CAR form SIP to be incorporated in this agreement. Form provided to be signed and returned with the counter. Straightforward. Now, this one, if the rent back is longer than 29 days, right? 29 days is for the SIP. If we know we have to stay longer, and we've had a lot of these conversations where people need to take 30, 45, 60 days, then this would be your counter for your seller. Occupancy to be delivered at 6 p.m. blank days after close of escrow. What it is, your note 30 to 60, whatever. Seller will pay whatever the amount is for possession of property. You could pick a per diem or a monthly amount. Say it's $3,000, $4,000, whatever they're going to pay. CAR form RLAS to be incorporated in this agreement, form provided to be signed and returned with this counter. So those are the wait, okay, normal seller in possession, they just need a few days to move out. We all know they need at least 3. If your seller needs more than 3, then you negotiate more than 3. If it's a contingent sale, you give them the 10 days because you know you're going to need extra time on a contingent sale. And if it's a rent back for anything longer than 29 days, you use the RLAS. Everything else is the SIP. Okay. Oh, it's already almost 12. Okay, so then we're going to finish this next Thursday. I said tomorrow. Next Thursday, we're going to finish this. If you guys have any questions, let me know. If I will share this with you, these counter offers. But only if you email me. If I get a text message or a phone call or someone walks up here and asks for it, I'm not going to do it. You have to email me. I'm going to try to be a stickler for you guys, because I always tell you, email me and I'll send you things. People don't email, they text, they do it. Email me. If you want this, send me an email, and I promise you I will send this to you. But don't text me, don't call me. Email me. Any questions before I let you guys go? Nope. If you missed any of this from the beginning, it's going to be on YouTube later today. Please, all my other videos are there on YouTube. Please go there, like them, share them, all that stuff. Subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate you guys being here for this. Take care of yourselves, be productive, and have a great day.